So hi, bonjour. I'm Romain Chalumeau. I'm working for a pharmaceutical group, and more particularly on a medical device context. I won't have to present you about thousands of nodes or artificial intelligence or whatever innovative. It's simple applications, but on very complex context, which is the regulation in pharma. So I will tell you about user experience, and actually a personal user experience. So I'm a bit impressed to do that, where we had to face many issues to have a regulated medical device and a regulated application on a public cloud. We have succeeded, but after many mistakes, and well, this is the feedback that I like to do if it can help someone not redoing the same mistakes. And of course, Kubernetes has played a big role, a big part in that resolution. So here we go. So I work for this German pharmaceutical group called Merck, and more specifically on the department that manufactures some medical device. We are located in Nyon, near Geneva, and we manufacture those autoinjectors. An autoinjector is a way for a patient to inject himself the drug that he needs. With that, it's easier for the patient, less painful. So we are really focusing on the health of people that are, well, suffering. And we manufacture two types of auto-injectors. Some mechanical, well, needle and we press, and some electronic medical device. Those auto-injectors have, well, two benefits. First, because the scope of the disease that we target are growth hormone deficiency and multiple sclerosis. Growth hormone deficiency means it's kids, 10 years old kids, that inject by themselves the drug. And for multiple sclerosis, we are talking about users having physical difficulties. So the goal of such an injector is that it's a simple button, then the needle is inserted, the drug is injected, and done. The second benefit to that is that it is connected. For a drug to be efficient, it has to be regularly taken. And for the appointment with the physician, it is important that he knows if the drug has been regularly taken or not. So we have connected those devices to an application where the physician can check, monitor the injection, and maybe adjust the dosage if he needs to have more efficient treatment. This application is currently used by physicians in 45 countries, which means in the context of pharma, it's almost 45 different regulations that we have to meet with. Not talking about the personal information that we store also, meaning the GDPR and all that stuff. So it means that we have many constraints that will arrive on this application. In 2015, the executives have decided that, well, let's go to the cloud. Must be cool. The idea behind that is, well, the classical commitment of the cloud. It is less expensive, of course. It will enable the innovation by technology. Is that a good thing? We'll see. And above all, the goal was to speed up the releases and ease the development, to have some DevOps thing. Until this time, it was on bare metal machines with a 24/7 classical operation stuff. And that's when I got hired. I have a strong IT background to automate in various environments, so let's go. The application is quite easy, I have carte blanche to choose whatever cloud provider and whatever architecture, the dream job, and it is well paid. So really, it should be a piece of cake. But I had no clue at that time of what a medical device could be. So I will try to explain in a few minutes what it took me several months to understand. A medical device is not about a feature, it's about an intended use. If the device or the application, because we call also a device an application, is linked to the health of a user, either directly like an implant, a pacemaker, or indirectly like an ECG, where, well, the physician will base the diagnosis on the output of such a device. Therefore, it is classified as a medical device. And in our case, the physicians or the nurses will adjust the dosage on the output of the application. So it is a medical device in 45 countries. And that's a big challenge in this compliance. There is no international standard. Each country has its own regulatory body to define what they expect from this kind of application. For instance, in Switzerland, it's Swissmedic that will rule what we can deliver or not. US, FDA, UK, NHS. And they have their own set of requirements. There are some strange ones in a cloud world. NHS, for instance, has a requirement until last year. So they have the requirement that the data related to UK patients has to be stored and processed in England, not even Wales or Scotland, England. In other words, it had the requirements that the data center has to be in England. We'll come later with this kind of requirement. But globally, for most of the regulatory bodies, we have three things to demonstrate to be able to be certified as a medical device. The efficiency of the device, the safety for the patient, and the confidentiality of the information that is protected. Efficiency, well, that's validated by clinical trials, and there's not much that Kubernetes will do on that part. But when we talk about safety and confidentiality, that's where we have a big work done by internal auditors, or QA, or compliance experts, whatever we call them. They will go into a qualification where they will assess all the risk that they could imagine. It's sometimes strange to say that an application can have a safety risk on the life of a patient. But in our case, we have a risk of overdosing. So we must be sure that the integrity of the data is under control. As the data is protected, we must also ensure who has access, who may access the data, which means in a cloud, you have to know who has access to the physical servers and how are managed the suppliers of your own supplier and so on. Last but not least of the risk, how do you ensure that your application for integrity, availability, and confidentiality always work the same if you depend on a component that is controlled by a third party? So the change control is a big subject in this kind of risk. This is the kind of questions that they raise, that they put as a risk, valuing them with, well, probability of the risk and impact or criticity of the risk. I come from IT, so of course this kind of thing, well, it's actually easy. I mean, we have many applications that run on Amazon, on Google, on Azure. They can handle some financial parts and so on. So we know that by experience, there are some mitigation and control measures that allow to manage the risk. my first error was not to consider the perception that some non-IT guys may have from the cloud. And the news are not are quite frightening each time. Those small articles are just a subset of what has happened last year and only in US. I have 10 times this kind of articles about breaches, about financial fines, about degradation of the image of the company, even some jail terms. So the impact is really big when we talk about e-health applications. So of course, my internal auditors, well, were quite reluctant that it is not risky, an application is not risky. Above all, since in many cases, there is a cloud vendor that is involved, not directly, not intentionally, but the name is there. So my mistake at that time was not to consider that the perception is important when we try to do a design that is in this kind of thing. Because to reassure this kind of auditors, there is no implicit. Everything has to be explicit and formally described or mitigated. So it drove me with three main challenges. What kind of delegation can I have? I had carte blanche to implement with whatever cloud provider. So I wanted absolutely not Kubernetes initially. I wanted all the managed services where we play with Lego bricks, of course, doing the application with all the managed service so that it's reliable, it's effective in terms of cost, and well, I will meet all the objectives that I was required. And I really think that it is reliable. The only thing that I didn't have was formal evidences that it is indeed reliable. And they got me on that one. A simple example. I've talked about how do we mitigate the changes when we use a service in a cloud vendor. I mean, if there is a change, there is a risk that there is a regression on the app, so breaking either the integrity or the availability of the app. I know that by experience, we receive an email telling us, oh, the API will change, or we had a new feature, or we have this and that. But when we go into the usage terms or the service terms or whatever contractual terms of the service, actually there is nothing that is written. There is no notification change that is notified, at least at that time, telling that some days before the change, you will receive an email or SMS. Nothing is done. And even on one of the terms, it was quite funny, well, even frightening. We had this sentence about, we will do our best to notify you about a change. So of course, my internal auditor said, no way. My second challenge is that indeed there is a promise, a commitment on the cloud that we can develop quickly. We can implement the things just by doing some configuration, some code, and done. Well, it's true on the condition we have a cloud. And my problem is that the efforts were linear. So meaning that we cannot start implementing, not even doing an architecture, until we know on which cloud we will be, since we want to use the managed services of the cloud. So that was also a burden for the project leader. When will we deliver? And regarding the first challenge, I mean, the qualification effort may take a really, really long time. Then, well, they just kill me on my effort to have managed services. They came with this very last risk, where they said, okay, let's imagine that we have a compliant cloud vendor with all the managed services. It is compliant today. What if, for whatever reason, GDPR, loss of a certificate, they are not compliant anymore? Oh, So meaning we need a failover cloud provider. And indeed, in the regulation, it's called the exit strategy. You need to have a failover provider for whatever you use. So meaning, not only will I have difficulty to qualify one cloud, but I need 2 cloud vendors. And it completely destroys this one, my first estimation, where it will be cheap to use the managed services of one cloud. But when we have 2, it means that we have to redo the architecture, redo the deployment, redo the procedure, the protocols, and everything. So finally, maybe a cloud is half expensive than a bare metal, but there I have to double the price, double the competency, everything. So this misunderstanding and my mistake had just created a new wall of confusion, the same one that I thought that was solved with DevOps, except that we were not on technical aspects anymore. We were just on, well, transparency on one side and managed services on the other side. So we couldn't find a common ground, and I had to admit that even though I wanted to drive the innovation by disruption, there is no innovation if there is no market. And there is no market if there is no certification. And there is no certification on those countries if those guys are not able to face the regulatory bodies to have the certification to deliver at last in this country. So I had to change completely the approach. And I have asked them, where would you be able, at which level will you be able to go? Which deployment model would you accept? We have arrived at this compromise that the YAS, and no more than the YAS, because VOS is a way to control the underlying layers. So we know that this virtualization part can be under control, and they would be happy with that. So then is the last question. Between what my internal auditor accepts and what the dev expects, what could implement the missing link? Well, that's when we went to Kubernetes. And to arrive there, it took us actually 1 year. 1 year of fight, meetings, workshops, trying to convince, and so on. Once we have detected that, just by having actually a constraint saying we can't go further than the YAS, everything was fluid, completely fluid. It has completely satisfied the internal auditors because the scope is small, it's under control. We only need virtual machine and some networking to be able to implement Kubernetes. And all the rest is version, Docker images, OS, and whatever we need. So meaning that we can track whatever change is done on this one. They were happy. For the dev and DevOps teams, well, happy too. I don't need to speak a lot. I think you know Kubernetes, but they could at last have a platform where they can consider something else than a simple, well, application server. So both parties were happy, and we finally succeeded in defining a plan. So it has solved my first challenge. Was left the 2 other challenges: time to implement and the exit strategy. And, well, of course, it has solved both at the same time, yep.
How long did it take you to reach the common decision?
1 year.
1 year.
Between the time when they said we go to the public cloud to find this one, yeah, 1 year. It's pretty hard when you have 2 different categories of people. Technical, being driven by technologies and all that stuff, and auditors, where they have another language. It's legal, it's evidence, it's documentation, and it's hard to go. But there with Kubernetes, we succeeded, well, first, to break the linear dependency of the workloads, meaning that the developer could start working even on their own laptop, thanks to Minikube. And at that time, the only managed Kubernetes was Google. So they could even play with Google managed Kubernetes to test some integration, having a more scale-up platform. For the internal auditor, they had no pressure anymore. They know that for each cloud provider, they can have a scope that is defined: virtual machine, storage, and network. So they started assessing all that stuff. And the ops team starting provisioning the various cluster, actually on all the cloud vendors, ramping up in understanding how Kubernetes can behave in terms of stability, in terms of monitoring, detection, and so on. And so once we have every team that has an output, we merge them. And we succeeded in having Azure that is compliant. Unfortunately, Google, that was my preferred cloud vendor initially. But we couldn't deploy on Google, well, actually for the requirement of the NHS, because there was no data center in England. So bye-bye, Google. And so once we have merged everything, we could start releasing really our application on the cloud. A bit later, a second cloud provider has been qualified, tested. That was Amazon. And without changing our application, we could deploy our exit strategy. So with this constraint, which was the YAS, arriving to Kubernetes, it has solved so many issues that I haven't considered at the very beginning, that it was quite, actually, magic. That has been done in 4 months. 1 year to decide, 4 months to implement, and everybody is happy. Is that the end? Almost. Because we cannot say that we have succeeded until we get audited. And we get audited every second month by everybody. We have been audited by US, UK, Brazil, Canada, Australia too. We have been audited by BSI for ISO 13485, the ISO 27, the SOC 2. Well, every second month we call them uncle and aunt now, the auditor that come to see us. If you don't know what is an audit, it's actually quite stressful. It's just like an exam. You have sometimes only 1 hour to convince the auditor that you are safe, efficient, and confidential. So going through an audit, and the auditors may not be a technical guy. So you have to be simple. You have to go straight to the point to understand what you are doing. And you must prove that you control absolutely everything. Well, it was quite surprising how it went smooth for all the audits. The first one was really stressful, but everything was there in Kubernetes. Of course, you have the audit logs, the sine qua non condition of such a framework, being able to tell who has deployed or changed what and when. But there are 4 other features that were a very good surprise for us, making the audits even smoother. It's not fantastic, revolutioning, but this kind of Kubernetes feature makes the thing really simple. The first thing is that it's not always easy to find the logs of a Docker running on a machine. I mean, you need to have the ID and so on. And this small feature where Kubernetes create a symbolic link to, where there is a namespace, the pod name, the container name, make it really easy to gather and centralize all the logs, either on a log host or on a log analytics tool. So it means that in a very short time, we could implement auto detection of the logs, pushing that to centralized analytics. And for the auditors, we have all the logs that we can show to him on a centralized place, whatever node it runs or number of pods. The second one is we are often challenged on how do we detect the incident and how do we measure the uptime that is a SLA for the physicians. The association of the readiness probes together with the ingress controller, and more precisely the default backend, make it really actually easy to detect any failure of the system. And by shining the readiness probe, escalating the non-ready state up to the ingress controller, so switching to a default backend, when you have a dedicated HTTP status code to this default backend, we just have to ping, and if we have a 200, it runs. If we have, in our case, we have a shorter than the 503, it means that we have an incident. So it means that we detect when there is an incident, we get alerted, and the guys on duty can go and check what's happening. And that's the note where I've been quite impressed by Kubernetes, but the most kick-ass feature I found in Kubernetes is the liveness probes. It's just incredible how it has solved all the operational parts. Last time we had an incident was actually in March 2018, so almost 1 year ago, and we had nothing until then. And it was even the London data center that has crashed, not even the application. Rest of the time, the guys just adjust the probes, it restarts, it restarts if the dependent one does. It gets, by experience, more and more reliable. It's just a fantastic thing. And it's also an easy thing to explain to an auditor, because the probe, contrary to or compared to the managed services, is not done by a load balancer or by a curl on an endpoint. We can have some scripts running inside the pod, giving the health of the pod, and deciding to restart or just put in a non-ready state. So for the site reliability engineering implementation, it's really a cool stuff. Then we are also very often challenged about how do we deploy the changes. And changes can be related to the application itself. So I am not even talking about the rolling update where we have no outage for a simple patch. When we change something, it has an impact on a user. So we are very challenged about how do we deal with this kind of thing, about the application, about the infrastructure, or about the compliance of my cloud vendor, meaning my exit strategy. And actually, we have been able to have the exact same strategy on whatever component is impacted. If we deploy a major release, blue-green deployment, with the namespaces inside the cluster. If we have to upgrade the VMs, or if we have to upgrade the Kubernetes version, well, blue-green deployment with a resource group inside the cloud vendor. And if we have to change the cloud vendor, blue-green deployment between two cloud vendors. And this simplifies completely, of course, the process documents, but even the procedures. Because to do this, we needed only two tools to be qualified, competent on kube control and Terraform. With those two things, our runbook are, well, very short, mainly composed by kube control create and Terraform apply, and that's all. And we could, for the ops arriving, we could prove that they are competent, because the knowledge that is needed to run a cluster and an application is really short. All the rest is done on Git, and well, we have an Artifactory for the Docker images. So we have only 4 tools to do everything that is described on our processes. I mean, it was much more than what I have expected when I have started with the managed services. And maybe there were other ways to implement this kind of thing. Maybe there were, and maybe the maturity today or the current service level of those cloud vendors allow us to do elsewhere. But there is something, and 3 main points where I know that Kubernetes will help us being, well, stable for integrity, availability, and everything. The first thing is that I like to tell that to compare Kubernetes like a supercharged engine in an old-looking car. I mean, only with a YAS, we have a very powerful engine, and that we can customize with, well, many of the components or many of the plugins that we have, allowing the developers to have more and more power, more and more design patterns. We are talking about kubeless on a YAS. It's quite incredible. But the landscape that we display to any auditor is simple VM, storage, and network. So it means that even for the most picky auditor, we can prove that everything is under control because it's fully transparent. It's fully version. There is no black box, which was the case with a managed service. If we talk about an API gateway or a Lambda function, where does it run? What are the components that are behind? How do we control? Here we have, with an asset inventory, so to this picky auditor, a way to fully describe what's running behind. Last but not least, for us, the future is absolutely uncertain. We have absolutely no clue how the regulations will evolve. First, because of geopolitical context. What will happen to data when the Brexit will arrive? What will happen in US, in Brazil? We have absolutely no clue on how the regulation about data and patient efficiency will evolve in those, well, quite conservative way. We have no clue neither how the regulation will evolve with the current scandals that there are in medical devices, like the implant scandals. It will be more and more restrictive, more and more control. And we don't know neither how those regulations, those 45 regulations that we have, will evolve with the current privacy affairs, like the Google one with the GDPR. How will the various cloud vendors will be considered by the FDA, by the NHS, Swissmedic, ASIP, and so many others. So we need a way to react quickly, being able to move the location of the data, being able to move from one cloud vendor to another, or coming back to bare metal. And indeed, Kubernetes has this promise that we have this portability allowing us this reactivity. So we are prepared for the future, even though it is uncertain. And yeah, portability, transparency, and control, those are for us the key factors that really make Kubernetes the right system for medical device compliance. Thank you.